It's the Smart Driving Cars podcast. Thanks for spending some time with us. We think we have a great panel and discussion in store for you. This edition is sponsored by the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. For more information, head to motoetf.com. I'm Fred Fishkin, along with the Faculty Chair of Autonomous Vehicle Engineering at Princeton University, Alan Kornhauser. Hi again, Alan.
Hey, good morning, everyone.
And with us this week are Robin Chase and Carlos Pardo from the New Urban Mobility Alliance. Robin is the founder, also is well known as the founder of Zipcar and more. Carlos is senior manager for pilots and is a psychologist who is focused on urban development and mobility. Also with us, Dr. Daniel Sperling, distinguished professor of civil engineering and environmental science and policy, and founding director of the Institute of Transportation Studies at the University of California, Davis. Thanks, Robin, Carlos, and Dan, for being here.
So great to have you.
Thanks for having us.
Our focus is on ride sharing and the impact of COVID-19. We could probably talk all day about this. Robin, perhaps, first of all, you can give us some background, the audience a little background about the New Urban Mobility Alliance.
I founded this, I had the idea a couple of years ago, and then I got some funding. My thought was that as I traveled around the world and talked to companies, private sector providers, they were saying, you know, we don't understand, cities don't even know what they want to do, and then they yell at us when we do the wrong thing. And then I would talk to cities and they would say, oh my God, these startups, they're just ruining things for us. So 2.5 years ago, I started something called, convened, and we created the Shared Mobility Principles. And those principles were it was a bunch of NGOs that put those together. And the idea was to have a standard set of principles on which we all could find agreements, every stakeholder. There's 10 of them, and I'll just say some of the first ones so you can see how straightforward they are. The first one is, oh my God, Carlos. Number two is we move people, not cars. The first is we build buildings and transportation together. But the idea is there are things that unite everyone who works on the realm of transportation. Among them, with respect to this idea of ride sharing, is that everyone seeks in urban areas should make efficient use of all of its assets, the curb, the roads, and the vehicles that ride on them. And that's where this ride sharing would come in. And I just want to, one more point as we think about this is let's define ride sharing. And for me, ride sharing means any two or more people who are going in the same destination who are sharing the trip. And I'm being very cautious here because I would not define Uber and Lyft and the TNCs as ride sharing, since they are one person is going in one direction. That it's not, two people are not sharing the trip unless it was an Uber pool or a Lyft line. So I think we want to really talk about more than one person sharing a vehicle going in the same direction. And that would go expansively all the way up to subways and buses, because there are many people.
Would you include, Robin, people who are in the same family? My spouse and I going out for dinner? Is that ride sharing?
Oh, you know, that is the gray area. And when we think about giving incentives or counting for commutes, that is often considered ride sharing. And in fact, it is sharing a ride in that those people could choose to go in separate vehicles. So I guess I want to give them a pass.
Yeah, but they could, but it's not practical. I mean, you know, should you really be able to use the carpool lane in California because you and your spouse are going to dinner? I mean, you're not going to take two cars. I mean, you're taking your kid to school. I mean, you're being a computer. Come on, Robin, don't let them have it. Don't let them have it. Dan.
Okay.
How about here, Dan?
I'm gonna weigh in on Robin's side here, because you know, having worked in the policy world for a while now, I've come to appreciate that when you try to fine tune these policies and regulations and so on, you tie yourself up in knots. And so you say, okay, you know, there's some parts that come along with the package that you just have to accept. Stay focused on the real mission and don't get too distracted.
I want to throw Carlos in though there. Carlos has 2 children who are not yet of driving age. But if he had a 17-year-old and a 12-year-old and his wife, and they all went together to different locations, they did some trip chaining, wouldn't that be considered ride sharing? Because they could go separately, but they decided to go together. Carlos.
But also, isn't it in the US that you are one person when legally when you are married? I mean, once I rented a car and then they said, well, your wife and you are the same person. So then it would not be sharing. So it makes it very complicated.
That's very spiritual, Carl.
Yeah. And I think if we talk to our spouses, I'm not sure we'd get agreement on that concept.
Carlos, I think we'd like to hear about some of the work that you've been doing at the Alliance, and it has to do with COVID and ride sharing. Tell us about it.
So yeah, so Robin actually made me quit my own job in an NGO that I created, and I was there for 10 years. So then you can imagine how persuasive she was. And I've been working in Numo doing pilots in different places in the US and more recently in Latin America. But then because of COVID, of course, things are now different. They change every day. And then we've started to sort of try and understand whether and how we can integrate the discussions that we've been having in Numo and sort of the different applications of tech-enabled disruptions. And it's been really interesting because since March, we have done a hackathon in Bogota, where I'm now based, to try and understand how we can solve transport during COVID, how we can get everybody to where they need to go, especially now. There's people who really have to travel. And then based on that, we said, okay, there's different options of what we can do. One thing is that we can create a platform where doctors can say where they're going, and nurses and administrative staff of hospitals. And then they can say, I'm here, and then I have to go here. And that platform is a digital platform where people could say, okay, then the government takes this information and creates new routes which are specific to these people. So that actually did happen but only with transit.
So that was new routes in mass transit?
Right, so they created new routes in mass transit and in public transport. We tried to get Uber, Beat, Didi, and some other ones to take part in this, but in our country, all of that is illegal. And even during COVID, we couldn't get the Ministry of Transport to agree that they could be of service despite being seen as illegal. They were just still illegal. We couldn't really get them there. So then that was sort of one portion of the work. Another one was that we got, well, one of the results of the hackathon was give bicycles to people. It was just, they said, well, this is the best thing that you can do. So I said, okay. And we got 400 bicycles from an e-bike shared bike provider in the city who had them all in a warehouse because they couldn't operate during COVID. And then we gave them to nurses and doctors and administrative staff in different hospitals where government told us, this is where you should go. So that was done during a month. And then we did a survey with them. We did a survey with people in Bogota. So then we got 1,000 respondents of people telling us actually that they would, many people who were riding transit predicted that they would change to bicycles or some form of active transport, including scooters and including e-bikes. But many people said that they would get off transit. Some people said that they would start to use app-based services was sort of the option. So then we started to sort of understand what was happening there. And what we're doing now is that we're working with a group of epidemiologists to understand whether transit is really safe or not during COVID, or how can we make transit safer before it goes broke. We all know that if we lose transit, we lose many livelihoods, basically, because many people have to use transit. So then we found 6 factors, which is where I think it becomes interesting also to ride sharing. After a lot of discussions, really a lot of discussions, because epidemiologists are very strict and stringent on what they approve is the truth. So we agreed that the cleanliness of vehicles and stations is fundamental. We agreed that the behavior of the users in terms of wearing the adequate face mask and eyewear for the entire journey was probably the most important of all.
Did you say
And
eyewear?
yeah.
I never heard about this before. Tell me.
Yeah, so the thing is that the face mask does reduce the risk of you coughing or doing anything. But since the advent of the finding that aerosols are a crucial thing also, and that we may get COVID because of aerosols, then you have to wear glasses. You have to have something which protects your eyes. So yeah, that is a new one. But then you also have to be silent, because 4 minutes of talking is the same as 30 seconds of sneezing. So then that is another thing. The duration of the trip is really important. And this is a bad thing for the US, where trips are pretty long. If you're going on a trip, or if you're being close to other people for more than 15 minutes, then it starts to become problematic. And I know that trips in the US are pretty long. Then we have yeah.
I think a better solution is better ventilation in the
Right. So
vehicle.
thank you.
I mean, we get on airplanes,
Yeah.
and they're
Yeah.
they're 10-hour trips.
So I was down to the first 4. Then you have distancing, which we are trying to demonstrate. We have actually demonstrated that you can be even as close as 1 feet apart from people, if all the rest is you're complying with all the rest. And the last factor, which is the most complicated one to understand, is the ventilation, because it is not just that there's a ventilation system, but also that the ventilation system is one where the air has 100% renovation in less than 1 minute. And that seems to be pretty hard. Like, not every air conditioning system is like that. Preferably, you would want to have a vehicle where the windows are open. So when you take all those 6, if you're doing all those 6 things right, then people can be pretty close to each other. And then ride sharing, for example, would be fine. You just open every window. You have shorter trips. You are not talking like crazy, and then you just wear your face mask and something like goggles or whatever. But that's sort of where we are. And we're trying to get something published, but I need all of these epidemiologists to say, yes, this is correct, and we're fine with saying this, and that's sort of where we are.
But the feeling seems to be, from the epidemiologists that you've spoken to and gathered data from, that ride sharing and transit can be safe even during a pandemic?
So, okay, and then that's something really interesting. I would even say, but they don't allow me to say it like publicly signed by all of them, that if
you can say it here, because
yeah,
you know,
we
say a lot of things. So go ahead, Carlos.
So for now, my sentence, my preferred sentence now is, it may be safer to be inside a vehicle than inside a shop, because you have better ventilation in the vehicle if you have it properly done. So that's sort of the key insight that I've arrived at. If you go into, whatever places, 7-Eleven or whatever, and you spend more than 15 minutes and it doesn't have good ventilation, then you're at a greater risk than if you're in a vehicle and it's moving, because your ventilation is so much better.
A lot of this is perception. I think that from the research I've seen is that there have been almost no cases of COVID traced back to transfer in mass transit or in vehicles.
Yeah.
Almost
None.
none. None. So, you know, if you come up with kinds of rules and guidelines like that, it's going to scare people even more, and it's going to be, you know, difficult. So I'm a little skeptical of coming out with those kinds of recommendations and guidelines. I mean, it's like the CDC said in the beginning, remember, they said, don't use mass transit. And those are the
That's because they
epidemiologists.
hadn't, but so that's an interesting point that you're saying two different things. One is it's a communications and marketing story, and everyone has got this idea in their mind, don't take mass transit. But on the other hand, the reality is that in certain circumstances, it's not high risk, and it has proven to be not high risk, and you need to communicate that in order to get people to travel again. So
the thing is, people don't talk in transit, right? Like you don't see people like just talking to the guy next to them. They
Yeah,
don't.
that's unfortunate, you know, but yeah, you're absolutely true. I mean, New York City subway system, especially before 9/11, I mean, nobody talked about.
They don't even look at each other.
One of the good things of 9/11 is at least maybe, you know, New York became much more friendlier and so on. At least you looked at somebody in the subway. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Carlos. People don't talk. They sit there and they sit there and read, and they have their phones here. Maybe the phone actually provides protection because it's being held up here, and you know,
like this.
yeah, right.
You know, I think the problem we have is that people are very fearful. They see high risk, and you know, if there's not high risk, that's the message that we have to get across. And in any case, this is going to go away. This is not going to be here forever. You know, if this fear of other people and sharing space with other people prevails and persists, that's not only the downfall of transit, of transportation, but of civilization as a whole. I mean, so we need to know that we are going to get beyond this, and clearly, you know, this risk factor is something that we need to address in a scientific way, but also in terms of addressing people's fears.
As Carlos pointed out, there's the whole issue of the economics, which I'm embarrassed to say that we all agree we should be putting health first, and we do put health first. But while people are afraid to get on and health isn't an issue, these public transit is going to go under.
Carlos, the epidemiologists that you've spoken to, do they discuss at all the need or use of technologies like UVC lighting or some other kind of sanitizing technology for vehicles?
Every time sometimes ring that up, then they just discard it. It doesn't seem to be so effective, and then it's such a huge hassle to put this into the system. So the thing is, how, if we take everything that we've said until now, and then also, I mean, Dan's point is very useful in that we don't have to tell people, follow these 6 things and then you'll be safe, because it's like, where are you taking me, right? How can we arrive at a place where we are being attentive to the health of people, but we're not reducing this to, you can't leave your home because then you're going to be at risk, right? And that's sort of, I mean, the interesting thing in this whole COVID problem is that we need to find agreements between these very different disciplines. And I'm always telling people, like, when we work in transport, we're like, oh, it's fine. I mean, we'll see what happens. It's okay. Whereas everybody in the medical profession is like, we need to have a 0.0001 confidence level or alpha, right? And how can we agree between all of us that it's going to be fine? Some of us may die, but how can we arrive at the place where we don't end up without any transit at all because we try to save people? And then many people, like what is happening in Colombia is, and in many places in Latin America, is that because people do not have any economic opportunity because of COVID, then they're dying because they don't have anything to eat, basically.
Yeah,
So
they're
how,
dying of
where
hunger. I
is
mean,
that?
you know,
Yeah.
life's a risk, and you know, we're always taking risk, and risk is a perception, which is why it's so nice to have you on here, Carlos, because you know, perceptions are key to you know, your perspectives. And it's always a trade-off of risk reward type of thing by the individual. And the whole thing is really what the perception is. Look, I mean, every time you get in the car, I mean, you
There's
know,
a reality
yeah,
when you're
you know,
saying that, Alan. There
yeah,
is perception of risk, but there's also real risk. And so the
absolutely.
balancing of the different real risks. And it's one of the interesting things we think of ride sharing in the US. So going away from, I'm going to starve if I can't go out and make some money. There's the other piece that if we let public transit go under, and if we discourage, or if people are discouraged from riding on trains that actually have quite a low risk, the alternative is rich people or people who have enough money will be buying cars, and then we can think about the associated health effects from poor air quality and climate, and what are those percentages of deaths and disease. So I feel like there is a little bit of weighing those likelihoods that has to be done.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, this is, unless we all stay in our hole and never get out, but you know, yeah, a lot of people don't have what we all seem to have here, us, that we can actually do this. I mean, my goodness, a lot of people don't have this opportunity. They have to go out and go to work and earn and to live, and they can't just work at home like we've been doing. I mean, we have it really good.
There is a real stark difference between people who need to take mass transit. It's a necessity. It's the only way. And people who have it as an option. Should I do it or should I not? Should I take a car? And people who are standing in a supermarket line where they have to be, you know, stand on the circles 6 feet apart from one another. Logically, they would think to themselves, well, I can't take mass transit because I'm a whole lot closer to other people than these circles on the floor are. So where it's an option, it's a different set of circumstances from people who don't have options, you know, in terms of getting from here to there.
Well, let me broaden that discussion a little bit more, because the reality is that the transportation system we have does a really poor job, really a socially irresponsible job of serving a large portion of our population. It's not only the people that are low income, but physically disabled. And what we call mass transit, so it accounts for, in the United States, about 5% of commute trips on average. But if you look at all trips, that means it's about 2% of all trips. And if you look at it in terms of passenger miles traveled, it's down around 1%. Now, I'm going to tell you, there's a lot more than, 1 or 2% of the population that need transportation service. Even if if you look at how many households are without cars, it's a relatively small, but it gets fairly large when you look at the Hispanic community and the African American community. But even there, they have one car in a household.
Right,
and
right. What do the other people do?
Right. First of, what do the other people do? Number one. Number two is those cars are often not very reliable. And so they break down, and they miss work, they miss health appointments.
They have broken taillights and they get pulled over, and then who knows what, and then there's a warrant out for their arrest because they didn't pay for the broken taillight that they got pulled over last week for. I mean, it's terrible. It's just horrible. Go ahead.
So, okay. So thank you, Alan. So the point is, we're doing the car-centric transportation system we've developed in the United States works for many people, but does not work for many others. And mass transit, it's on a pedestal, we treat it, and rightly so, but it still serves a very small percentage of the, we'll call them the mobility disadvantaged population. So if we're really serious about creating, let's not even say better transportation, let's even say, maintaining even what we have, but certainly improving it in terms from an equity perspective, from an economic perspective, because we spend a vast amount of money on our vehicles and fuels and roads. And from an environmental perspective, in terms of climate change and pollution and health, for all of those reasons, not only can we do better, but we should and must do better. And that's where the ride sharing comes into this. And, we can all do forecast. Well, we can all do, I just spent a couple hours on the phone yesterday with some experts on transit, and they told me all the reasons why you can't change it, why you can't get it to work more, partner with ride sharing companies and micro mobility companies. And there's a long list, and it's, and they're correct. But here we are in a crisis, and it is a real crisis. From a transit perspective, these transit operators, they've lost 70 to 90% of their riders. So they're heavily subsidized already. And so the amount of fare revenue they're losing is important, but it's not massive. But the other side of it is they're also losing revenue in terms of where they get their money from sales tax, from gasoline taxes, and so on. So the transit operators and they were already losing ridership for many years. Transit needs a revolution. Transit needs transformation. And the way I look at it, and so I didn't introduce some of my activities, but at the Institute of Transportation Studies, we have a big program on what we call the 3 revolutions, and that's linking together electric vehicles, sharing, and automation. And we do that because going forward, there has to be a broadening of the concept of public transportation, the reality of public transportation. And the only strategy I see, at least for the United States, is partnering with ride sharing and micromobility companies, public, private. And there's all kinds of reasons why that can't happen and all kinds of barriers. But I'm here to say, if we don't do that, we really are we are letting down a huge percentage of the population. We're creating really barriers, people just in simple things, people getting to work, getting to health services. But in terms of our transportation system, it just is a disaster.
But Dan, a question I have on that is that I might suggest that one of the reasons why I don't ride share when I get in my car and go someplace is that I have no idea that there's anybody who would want to go from where I am to where I want to go, or in the direction that I want to go, that I can drop them off at the time when I want to go. I have no idea. I don't know what my neighbors are doing. Is it possible to create an information infrastructure that maintains all kinds of privacy appropriate, but just makes it so that needle in that haystack can find itself? I mean, in some sense, the same way, the original Amazon concept was, holy mackerel, I'm looking for this book, I can't find it, I'm gonna, it's a needle hidden in this haystack. You create this information system, I find it, I get my book. I guess maybe I'm not, really responding to the right origin of Amazon, but I think, my looking is, I created what I think is the 1.2 billion trips that take place on a typical day in the United States, and look at them and try to match them up in Peoria, in Houston, and whatever, and see what the opportunities are for those things are. And when my students look at that, we see there are opportunities. There are people who go from about the same place to about the same place at about the same time who could be going together. There's just no information to bring them together, let alone my ability to open my car windows, let them in there and jump in the car with me.
Alan,
Yeah,
Alan.
Robin, yeah, please come in.
So, so one of the things I didn't talk about on my resume is I spent 2 years building a ride sharing company that ultimately failed. And this would be long distance ride sharing, but I still given it a lot of thought. So what you're talking about is origin destination timing matches.
Yeah.
I want to talk to this in 2 points.
Yeah.
One is we have there's a lot of flexibility in our timing.
Sure.
And I would say a little bit, and there's a little bit of flexibility in our origin and destination, like the 2 or 3 blocks.
Sure.
But my incentive to make any of those adjustments is just about 0 because we have so underpriced car travel. I was once talking to an audience of 1,000 people in Barcelona when I was doing this. And I said, how many of you would wait 2 minutes in order to pick someone up, to give someone a rideshare ride, and you can get paid €1 for this? Would you be willing to wait 2 minutes to give someone a lift within the city doing the same thing? Mm-hmm. Not one hand in 1,000 people raise their hands. So first off, our pricing signals for me not taking my own car or caring about the other person who doesn't have a car is just about 0 now.
Yeah.
And then the other side of it is when you say, is there a way to get that amount of data? The thing that completely knocked my socks off was when, I think it was Lyft was the company that did it first. So I always thought the regular TNC is basically taxis. It's just taxis. It is taxis, and I called it the people's taxi, even though they called it ride sharing. But when they actually started to do Lyft Line and Uber Pro, I thought, oh my God, they actually are able to do this because they have created this huge amount of origin destination timing demands, this incredible critical mass. So a small fraction of those are able to pull through. And I'd say they could do it because they backed into it by, I'm going to drive you by yourself, and there were high costs associated. But those costs associated were still not high enough to make it a huge demand. And it only worked in the incredibly dense urban areas that we're talking about. So having said all that, I want to just go what Dan said, around what Dan said.
Okay.
I've been looking at numbers, and it's fully 50% of the population at any given moment either doesn't have a car or doesn't have a driver's license. And so when we're car dependent, 50% of the people at any given moment can't go someplace.
Sure.
When we're throwing around all these numbers, and this is a number you guys all know, 50% of the trips are less than 3 miles. So when we're trying to build out our transportation system that works, that I think we absolutely profoundly need, given that 50% of people are completely out of luck, I think we need to think of it as a multimodal one. So it's not you have to own a car, or you have to do ride sharing to get in a car, or ride sharing to get in something. It also has to be the ability to walk someplace safely, or to take a micromobility bike or e-bike someplace safely. So at least 50% of the trips in my life, a whole bunch of us could be taking, even though we are 14 years old or 82. But we need to think, just as this session is around ride sharing, and that is definitely a piece of the multimodal continuum that we must have if we're going to solve this problem for urban and rural, young and old, licensed and unlicensed, and getting people places.
Yeah, I'm fully with Robin on that. And you know, a first step is appreciating that we don't have these incentives and disincentives to encourage the pooling of rides, the use of micromobility for short trips. And, you know, as Robin said, people don't have a motivation to do it, as you said, Alan. And so so I think there's a lot of opportunities for starting in that direction. And the intermodality is critical to this, getting people accustomed to it. You know, and if you look at it from a user perspective, I gave up my car and just started using these services. And I came to appreciate that I love being chauffeured. on top of everything else we've talked about, I saved a lot of time. I could read, I could doze off. I didn't have to worry about falling asleep at night driving. It had all these benefits, and we've become so there's partly the incentives and disincentives, but it's also, this is the psychology part of it. We've become so accustomed to just using our cars. We don't even think about other modes. We don't even think about the disadvantages of it. We don't even think about how it could be different or better. And, the problem is we've just had these two modes: transit, which is, really very low quality service for almost everyone, and then cars on the other hand. And so now, and this is what I think Robin's talking about also, is creating a whole suite of services, of mobility services.
Oh, isn't it that we haven't sold it right? And let me be a little bit blunt on this. Seat belts. I think I claimed at one point in my life, I'm never going to wear a seatbelt. But of course I would do that. That's the kind of things I do. Now I don't even think about it. Man, I put that sucker on. One, seatbelts got a hell of a lot better than they were in the 60s and the 70s. Okay, no doubt about that. But there was a long-term concerted effort to wear a seatbelt. I mean, it started in grade school that, I don't know, maybe in kindergarten, teachers were saying, there's nobody in kindergarten that's telling kids, hey, to save the environment, to save the planet, to do pollution, to save energy, to make it affordable, to provide opportunities for everybody, all the good things that we see coming out of ride sharing. There's nobody in kindergarten telling that to the kindergarten kids, or in first grade or second grade or grade schools or whatever. There's none of that. In fact, get in your own car and be afraid and whatever. It's even anti that. And so, of course, nobody raises their hand. They want to. There is no fundamental tree-hugging aspect associated with ride sharing. Am I wrong? Or go ahead, Robin, jump in here.
I keep waiting for Carlos to say something.
Yeah.
But I have something to say.
No, but I mean, the history of why people have changed their minds and now do things automatically is pretty interesting. And there's entire books about how the tobacco industry didn't want people to stop smoking, and then they said, well, no, it's fine, you won't die from this. And then, I mean, I think you can communicate things persuasively if you have something to communicate properly. Like, you can't promote transit in Detroit where the frequencies are 45 minutes. Like, you can't promote anything. You could only promote, you can read an entire book while waiting or something like that would be the only way of doing that. So I think
you're harsh, Carlos. You're harsh.
No,
go ahead, keep going.
But the thing is, I was once I'm coming from working in developing countries where in my city, if a bus is 5 minutes late, they will burn the station. And it has happened almost exactly that way. So when I hear something like our goal is to have 15-minute frequencies in the next 5 years, I'm like, you're crazy. Like, how can this be a goal? So it's really been a learning process. But so I think that we do have to communicate things, but we do have to create better information so that it's not a needle in a haystack, but rather a stack of needles of waiting for trips, but also that we can price correctly. And then one thing to take, Robin was saying 50% of trips are less than 3 miles. 52% of trips in the US are less than 6 miles. And more importantly, 73% of those trips are done by car. And anything below 3 miles can be done in any mode. And I don't even think that we should be thinking about those 3 mile trips or below to be done in anything other than a non-motorized trip. And then that could help us in understand, where do I put every piece of the multimodality? Should I have ride sharing for much longer trips, or so where is the best place for Is it transit for very long trips, and then you have ride sharing for more or less longer ones, and then you have what is now called micromobility for shorter trips? I mean, I haven't been able to find sort of the best way of identifying the length of a trip with the service that has to be associated.
Two different points. One, Alan, when you were talking about the marketing analysis of choosing a shared mode, shared vehicle versus driving yourself, I think that anyone under the age of 35 would rather not be driving because they'd rather look at their phone and do stuff online. So I think
agree.
that they have now gotten themselves into that position. All things being
Even
equal.
some of us
Right.
are old folks.
I'm saying it's not. They no longer they don't need any persuasion. But other things are not equal, right? Other things are not equal.
Agreed.
And then to Carlos's point, a long time ago, I heard this really great study by a transportation economist, a Chinese transportation economist, and he was analyzing a very densely used subway, and their goal was to get people out of trains for trips that were less than 5 kilometers. And so that really was, it was a stated goal. We want to do all this bike sharing so that no one would get onto the subway because we want to free that up for those longer trips. And again, as we're having these discussions, are we talking about urban areas or less densely populated ones? But
if you take this a little further, Robin, Carlos, Ellen, is, if we try to optimize in that way, that's just not a good, I don't think that's a good way of thinking about it, because you've got a lot of people, they can't even walk, 100 meters. You've got a lot of people with a lot of different circumstances. So, trying to come up with ironclad rules about how you design these systems and services, I don't think is a very fruitful way to approach. I think a more fruitful way is how we started this conversation, is creating more of a suite of services that are available to people, and understanding that, different people are making different choices. And so it's more about choice and availability. And sure, we want to be smart about it and do it in a way that makes sense. We got to fit it. Suburban areas are different. Really hot climates are different than cold climates. So there's a lot of differences. So that's why I think, these ride sharing companies, the Lyft and Uber are so important, because they were the first service that worked through a mobile app, that people would get into other people's vehicles, and it's on-demand service. We tried Alan will remember this well, in the 1970s, we tried on-demand dial-a-ride services, and it failed, for a number of reasons. So, but we brought it back. And that really is the secret, is this on demand. And so we have the micro
And
mobility.
we made it easy. What I always like to say about Uber and Lyft, the app may be the best app I've ever seen. I mean, it is really good. It shows you where it is. It takes all the hassle. Nobody touches the money. No, but to me, I think that's very important, why people just, put their faith in it.
it is.
Robin, jump in. Go ahead.
So
Sorry.
there are two interesting points there. One is, yes, the apps are beautifully designed. And when we think about on demand and the app is really, it's not coming that second. It's not even coming in a minute. No. It's coming in 5 to 10 minutes.
But it makes you feel like it's
watching
coming right
the thing
now.
And whatever. So I want to say we have cleverly changed what that means, because people always were comparing it. Well, if it's my own car, I just jump in. But in any case, we have crossed that chasm. The other piece I want to point out, that those TNCs, Uber and Lyft and Didi and all of them, they initially started using my own unused asset of my car. So I already have a driver's license and I already had a car. And because I happen to live in this neighborhood and I have some free time, I'm gonna try this thing out. That economics works really well, because it's assuming that I don't have to pay, this asset doesn't have to be used 24/7 and get a return on asset. It assumes that I've got healthcare benefits, all social safety net issues, you know, vacation, sick time, and whatever. It worked well when it was leveraging, when it was a side job and leveraging this excess capacity. As a full-time,
Yeah. And
I'm
people
gonna do
work
the-
for free. You need, and people work for
and
free.
the asset,
Go ahead.
and the
go.
asset has to be completely paid for.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
What's
absolutely.
challenging for me is I want to say I'm open-minded, or I'm exploring this. Is this a reality? Some friends tell me it is, and I don't know. Is it true that transportation is inherently incredibly expensive and there isn't a free ride? So when we own our own cars, we know people are spending $9,000 a year, $25 a day, day in, day out, whether they use a car or not use a car, and they suck it up. And the government is paying for the infrastructure, which we all suck up, and no one's paying for the CO2 emissions. Or when we think about the TNCs, it sounded good, it could be good, but wasn't it venture capitalists that were financing it and the workers weren't wherever? So is it true that transportation as a whole is incredibly expensive because it needs to be networked to be on demand enough? Or can we also say, maybe if everyone went to very light micromobility vehicles and only use these other things exceptionally and at their true costs, then we could be paying for it. So the economics of transportation is kind of intriguing to me.
Well, I claim it doesn't scale until you replace that entity with a computer that Moore's law has gotten to be free. Okay. And in a sense, you've taken that individual and you put a computer in there and now they do it and they can do it 24/7. They don't care whether it's 2 o'clock in the morning. They don't care if you're black, white, or indifferent,
But building that particular platform and maintaining it and keeping it going is not free.
Absolutely. That's why you need a big scale. You need to be able to spread it over an enormous 20 million vehicles nationwide, or 2
So
million.
is that a public effort or a private effort?
Probably it starts private, ends up being public, as most transportation. It starts private. Public can't do it. We know the public can't do it. Doesn't have enough money. Okay.
But on
No,
the
I don't know. I don't know.
For a
I'm sorry.
moment.
That's why we could go on forever on this sucker. I mean, it
Okay,
is. Yeah, go ahead.
so I'm going to weigh in with Alan here.
Weigh in. Come on.
Really. So everything we've been saying here is true. Transportation is expensive. Intermodality, the suite of services is important. But and more partnerships with these new mobility companies and transit's important. I think those are all the path forward. But really, if we're going to get significant improvement and change, it really does end up with automated vehicles. There's almost no other way forward that we can do it and really transform the transportation system to be much more sustainable in every way. But the way it happens and the path has to be through what we'll call pooling or sharing more than one rider. And it means, people giving up their own personal ownership and being chauffeured, a lot of attractions to that. But making it multiple passengers, and then you start bringing that cost down. And so we're not talking about only, a regular sedan. We're talking about like what Via does with vehicles that are essentially small vans, or what General Motors came out with their Cruise vehicle. It holds 6 or 7 people. It's an automated electric shared vehicle. It's a prototype now, but they say they're ready to go in production, if and when demand and so on is available. So if you have that ridership where it's more than one rider, then you start reducing those costs. And it does bring us back to the sharing idea, but it does mean that, okay, a car is 55 cents a mile now, total cost of ownership. And you add automation, robots, computers, it adds maybe another 10, really about 10 cents
A penny.
mile.
In the long run, it's a
In the
penny.
long-
Go ahead. No, whatever. Yes, you're right.
You're right.
Go ahead. Go. Yeah.
In the long run, you know,
Yeah.
so
No.
even say 10 cents.
Yeah, 10 cents.
Okay.
Sure.
And okay, now if you shift to commercial operation, you have overhead and so on. So makes it a little higher. But you know, now you have even 2 riders. But if you have 3 riders or 4 riders, you're bringing that cost down very low, much lower than much lower than the cost of transit, much lower than the cost of private ownership of your own car. But it does come back to this idea. Well, there's 2 things. One is, you know, having robots running our cars, and the other is the sharing part of it. And that's why I get particularly alarmed by this concern about sharing, because in every way we need to be sharing on transit, on planes, on scooters, on bikes, and on ride hailing.
On that note, we'll continue in just a moment, but this is a good time to remind you about our sponsor, the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. To get more information, head to motoetf.com. When you get to the website, it's a good idea to read the white paper that's there. It's titled The Smart Transportation Revolution. It's under the Insights and News tab. Lots of great information there to help you make informed decisions about investing. You may know that ETFs can be a smart way to spread your risk and focus on a particular category. So the site again is motoetf.com. Going to turn to some of the headlines from the latest Smart Driving Car newsletter. This one is hot off the press, Alan. Prosecutors recommending a prison time of 27 months for Anthony Lewandowski, the former head of Uber's self-driving unit, who had entered a guilty plea to taking documents from Google and bringing them to Uber.
Well, I guess you're trying to get me in trouble by commenting on that. I guess I'll put myself in trouble. I don't know, as I put in the newsletter, I don't know, I guess Trump's not his friend or something like that for the prosecutors to come out there. I mean, I don't know. You know, I mean, Anthony did a very bad thing, and it's a very bad, and it's a thing that that nobody in Silicon Valley or anybody should do. Whether or not Anthony deserves to go to jail for over a year for it, you know, I tend to think that that's really harsh. I think the better thing is to take some of his money and take some of his time and put it to good use to help rehabilitate some people that are currently in prison and bring them out. And I think that would be a whole heck of a lot more better thing to do. Yeah, you know.
I don't think so, Alan.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. No.
Let's
Jump in
hear
here.
from an entrepreneur.
I would
right.
say that was white collar crime. He stole
Yeah.
something that cost hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And he's going to go to jail for 27 months for having stolen hundreds of millions of dollars. Think how much jail time people are spending otherwise.
I agree with that statement totally, Robin. Okay, go ahead.
So
Keep
I
going.
wanted just to go back to where we ended up with the autonomous vehicles going everywhere.
Yeah.
I want to remind us that we all agreed we need a multimodal system. So we need to make sure that we have made safe bike pedestrian network road allocation for everywhere to accommodate all those short trips wherever they are, which means less space for these other autonomous vehicles that are door to door. And we need to get the right pricing for congestion. And we're saying there'll be no emissions because they'll be electric, but we need to get the right pricing for electric, because at the prices that from Dan's group, Lou Fulton, he was saying the marginal cost of moving an electric autonomous AV is like 55 cents for, I think I used to quote this, I think it was 55, it ends up being about 55 cents an hour if you're doing like 30 miles an hour. And I think, where would I not send a vehicle for 55 cents an hour of marginal cost? There's no place I wouldn't send it. And so I have a huge, huge anxiety based in economics, which is if we don't charge for zero occupancy vehicles, we're going to be using those vehicles to do any useless thing at all. So coming back to whether it's a solution or a hell, it's an enormously fantastic solution if we can clamp down now on all the things we know are issues, which is congestion and emissions and road space allocation. Like those have to be built into those cheap prices.
And vehicle utilization.
And I think ride sharing has to be in there, and it has to be motivated, because that's the only way you address the congestion issue, is you make sure that there are 2-3 people in the vehicle, and it probably doesn't come from your doorstep, taking you from your doorstep. It comes from a bus stop to a bus stop, which is easily accessible, for which there's better opportunity to have a ride share and those kinds of things. It is not to have, individual menued services for that go out there.
Unless we get the pricing right and the infrastructure right, it's hellacious.
But beyond that, Robin, I mean, once we were, you and I, in one of, or maybe you weren't there, it was a discussion where we had somebody who was advocating for fairness and equity in general, and then she said, I in principle, the idea of autonomy is interesting, but if you have, I think the example was, if you have a Black woman waiting for an autonomous shared ride and it arrives and it has 3 white men inside, she will not take that ride. And then, so, I mean, economically, it makes a lot of sense to not have a driver, but there is a need for some intervention of not necessarily a driver, but somebody else. I mean, I think there's a lot of devil advocates arguments around this to sort of look at what we are proposing.
I agree with you, and it could be a Black woman or it could be a white woman. That is definitely an issue, and it's an issue. And in many places, we have women-only vehicles because men are terrible. But we also have, shockingly, and I don't want to undercut that example because I think it's true. I have been a woman. I am a woman. I've been a young woman, and I wouldn't want to do that either.
You're still a young woman. Come on, Rob.
But let's just look. I've watched, and you have too. I was in Washington, D.C. a couple years ago, and I watched this beautiful young Black woman get into an Uber or Lyft that had a young white male driver, and I thought, oh my God, have times changed? That woman was willing and planned and was going to get into that car. That he was a complete stranger, not licensed in some usual way. And so I want to give possibility to both of those. Possibility number one, we will be making accommodations that are, you know what, there are people who are horrific and you can never ride with them. And they're also culturally really bad behaviors, and we'll make those accommodations. But also there's this crazy ability among us to accommodate those things, because whatever the situation was, it wasn't high risk, and there was a video camera in the car, and I do have my panic button, and my husband did know that I went, I don't know, I'm saying
Robin, I looked at elevators and the use of elevators. I always use an elevator analogy. And in certain situations, if you're in Trump Tower, the elevator is used one way. If you're in Bedford-Stuyvesant, it's used another way. But elevators, at least pre-COVID, were shared. Kids who lived in Bed-Stuy or whatever on the 15th
But there's also times when they were very dangerous. In projects, people don't get into them. That's why they use stairs.
Yes, but 14 flights, who knows? And Pewitt-Igos and blah 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 and whatever that we've built for. We don't even. Holy mackerel, we're going to be here for a week, not just all day if we go into that one. But we need to, first of all, we need to behave, and all this misbehavior that we've done in the past has to end, and all this racism and crap. We have to get beyond all that stuff. And in fact, we've been very wrong on all that. And I don't even want to go into, we can't go there either. But I think we have to promote the fact that we should be riding together. That gets back to my, we haven't sold this at all. There aren't really people out. I mean, there isn't a great movement saying, hey, give a ride to somebody. Hey, it's okay if you're out there hitchhiking. Holy mackerel. I didn't have a car until I was 20. I couldn't afford it. 22 years old. I hitchhiked everywhere. I mean,
So the question is, if we do some of those security measures like Robin was talking about, video cameras, a red button, better licensing of the, if there are drivers, more video if there's not drivers, and perhaps even, picking affinity-based rides so that, the vehicle is only for women.
You think about children going to soccer.
yeah.
Yeah. So is that going to work? I mean, are these the measures that will be acceptable and effective?
I mean, sometimes when you add all of these things, you actually end up with public transport as we have it today. And then it's just a funny thing that I mean, we may be just looking at things in such a way that we say, well, we need all of this because that's what we have now, and then we want to just return to what we have just in a better state. And probably there is a way where we can get all of this together, get the economics right, and then we will have better systems. I mean, the beauty and sort of the promise of self-driving vehicles with ride sharing is that you have so much greater flexibility. But then that promise needs to be achieved by actually having self-driving vehicles which are truly self-driving, and then not depending on the venture capital funds in order for this to exist.
Properly, overseeing them properly, putting the right constraints on it, making sure that the local community is able to go into and change the algorithms that are being used to run these things, and be able to have the reporting that in fact it is serving the community that needs the mobility first. I mean, I happen to think that all those things are doable. Why? Because it's an algorithm. There's code there. You can follow it. It's not a bunch of AI. Really, I mean, because never mind. But that you can do that and deliver that. And I think with respect to the pricing, there are two things. There's the cost and there's the price. Okay. And one has to deal, because you can price them any way you want. Depends how much you need alms for the poor to go out to take whatever you price it at to go pay for what the heck it costs. And the more that it costs, the more you have to be out there alms for the poor. And so, all those things.
There's a related story.
Or did we just? I don't know. But this is such a great topic. I mean, I don't know.
Well, I want to bring this one in, Alan. We're not going to get to most of the stuff that's in the newsletter. People should be reading that anyway. But Electrek reports that Tesla has been working on its own ride-hailing app. Musk has talked about this before. Tesla Network. And it says Tesla plans to offer special insurance for owners who participate in the network. So maybe this thing is going to be real, where people can turn their cars loose?
Yeah, no, I think, forget, that's not going to happen I'm going to be dead and gone. I'm sure by the time that happens. But the interesting thing about that is they could pivot that so that the Tesla driver could be using that as part of the information system that lets them know the other people who might be going from where they are to where they're going at about the time they're going, and maybe welcome them into the vehicle and take them. And if there are enough Tesla drivers out there, then that person may in fact be willing, be feeling that in fact they can get a ride home too. And because it's not just the ride there, you got to get the ride home. I mean, that's why, all the carpooling stuff, never went anywhere, because you had to guarantee both of them with the same person. That probability of that is 10 to the minus 82. So, but
But if I own,
yeah, go ahead.
if I own my own Tesla, in what circumstances am I going to want to ride share with you?
Because you're public spirited this, and you think that this is part of your tree hugging, and this is part of the save the planet, and there's part of that. Well, I know you shake your head. No, nobody thinks that way. Why not?
You have to pay your
Because
car.
in fact, this does more to save the planet, to deal with that, than a lot of the other things
Carlos,
people do. Huh?
Carlos, to pay for my own car, that's why I'm going to rent it out to other people. But that's not, if I owned my car, I would not be ride sharing with someone else.
You wouldn't pick somebody up in your neighborhood and take them because you happen to know they were going.
One of the things about the Tesla network is that he has got it a closed Tesla network among only Tesla drivers.
That's
Tesla
unfortunate, and it doesn't scale. Yeah,
it doesn't. There's no network effect there, and there's also
Yeah.
not meeting a supply and demand.
yeah, but it's a place to start. I mean,
But it will fail.
you can't
So
start
it
it.
can't succeed if it can't survive.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, that's part of the problem here with all this. The problem is getting started. There,
So
we
I have
have
a-
all these visions of some, future where everything is great. The problem is we haven't even started with driverless yet. There is,
I was talking to
not there
Peter
yet.
Calthorpe, and I thought he had an interesting thought, which is bus rapid transit with autonomous vehicles, because then it solves a huge amount of the technical safety issues, because that vehicle is in its lane and it has its route and it's in its lane. It reduces the price of transit. So I thought it kind of overcame
How does
some
it
of the
reduce the
technical,
price of transit? I mean,
because
it really
you took away
doesn't.
drivers.
Yeah, I mean, but if it's a real bus rapid transit system that has real demand, you should be able to have 30, 40 people in there. They can each pitch in a dime or 20 cents and pay for the driver. The issue is when you don't have enough people to pitch in and pay for the driver. It's not in the bus rapid, but anyway, that takes us a whole different.
But let's just say you're in small town X. There could be a discrete number of routes from places to the essential services, to the school, to the food store, to the hospital, whatever. There's a discrete, like you would put on it a subway map.
Operational design domain, sure.
And
Local streets.
And those streets would be hyper mapped in their safety ways. So it's less risk for the autonomous
Sure.
vehicles than going anywhere from anywhere.
Yeah.
It would be able to. So I thought that was
Sure.
an interesting compromise idea.
Yeah, but that's out of any of these operational design domain. It's a subset of the network in which you think, you can actually provide the service, but to sit there and say, I'm going to provide scheduled service between that for to do.
No, not the schedule part, just the fixed tracks.
Sure.
Fixed.
Well, it doesn't even have to be wide. Should it be fixed? It really can use the whole network. It can make left turns, right turns. It can go in. I mean, that's
Then you're getting to that. Then it has to do all the safety of the whole town. So I just was saying
yeah,
it
the
was a
safety
way
thing.
to reduce the infinity to a known subset.
Well,
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, the part of that is compelling to me is that we have to start somewhere, and part of this is the local communities having confidence. So, making those operational design domains more limited, does make sense in that way. I mean, the fundamental problem is we've created is land use, and, we're not going to fix that overnight, but we got so much sprawl and such diffuse origin and destination patterns, even for any particular household, that it's really, that's a barrier here. But it's also the opportunity for the automation and the on demand, because, that's why conventional transit won't work in almost, the vast majority of this country. And so in kind of a backward way, it means that we do need to do it differently. And so these micro transit ideas where you're using vans, VIA is a good example. They're doing it at a more limited way and getting into pooled rides and then pooled automated. It seems like that's really, as I said earlier, that's the only path to a significantly better transportation system.
It has to be accepted by the customer and the people that live along the routes of, or the roads of the operational design domain. As I like to say, you know, if one of these things comes down my street and I don't want it here, I'm going to send my dog out there. It's going to stop. I'm going to run out. I'm going to jack it up and put it on cinder blocks and steal its wheels. So in fact, it is a very much of a local thing. It's not brought down from the top. We're giving you this service. It has to be brought up from the customers who will actually benefit from it, who will protect it, who think that this is contributing to them. If it doesn't do that, it's never going to start. It's never going to happen, irrespective of the amount of investment capital coming out of Silicon Valley or whatever. I don't know, maybe, but Fred's trying to, Robin needs to go.
Well, we want to remind you to check out the replay, video or audio of last week's Driving the Debate on Amazon, Zoox, and beyond. The site is drivingthedebate.com. Keep an eye out for more to come. If you're signed up for the Automated Vehicle Symposium taking place this week, keep an eye out for us there tomorrow. That is it for this edition. Thanks to our sponsor, the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF. The ticker symbol for the ETF is MOTO, and more information is available at MOTOETF.com. We want to thank Robin and Carlos from the New Urban Mobility Alliance. The website is numo.global. And Dan Sperling, really appreciate you being with us as well. The website for more there is its.ucdavis.edu. Sorry. You can find us at smartdrivingcar.com, also on Anchor FM, Spotify, TuneIn, wherever you get your podcasts. You can get your smart speaker to play us. You can find my tech reports at textination.com. I'm Fred Fishkin along with Alan Kornhauser. Thanks for listening or watching, and please stay safe.